match for me.
Buckle up, everyone. We're really in for it this time. What's up, everyone? Frost here, and today we're ranking every single Sonic Adventure 2 boss fight from worst to best. A lot of you seem to really enjoy the video I uploaded earlier this year where I ranked all the stages from worst to best, so I decided to go back and cover the bosses too. The process of making this video was quite interesting, and I learned a few things about the way the bosses function that I didn't know before making it. So how did I rank the boss fights in a game known for its unbelievably terrible AI? Keep watching to find out. Before we jump in though, I want to point out that I didn't consider every single encounter in the game as its own boss fight. This is because a lot of the bosses are really similar to one another, so it wouldn't make much sense to rank them separately. I will explain the differences in each case as we get to them though. Also, just like my video ranking the game's stages, I didn't really consider music a whole lot when making the list since I think music quality is just too subjective a factor for a list like this. If you guys really want to see me make a list of some sort related to Sonic the Hedgehog music, let me know in the comments and I'll consider doing it. With that stuff out of the way, let's get into the list. Number 9. The Tails vs. Eggman fights. These two clash twice in the narrative, once on Prison Island and once on the Ark, but I decided to count them as one fight because there are only a few small differences. You have to contend with both basic energy shots and charge shots from either Tails or Eggman depending on who you're playing as, but both attacks are easy to dodge unless you're just actively screwing around. During the Ark version of this encounter, however, the opposing character gets an insanely powerful weapon courtesy of what some prefer to call the fuck you laser. The enemy character only uses this attack when at half health or lower, but it's incredibly dangerous since it can decimate your health bar in a hurry. This is especially true when playing as Tails since you don't have the upgraded armor that Eggman gets. The laser also causes quite a bit of knockback, so if you get hit while trying to strafe away from it, you can easily get knocked back into it, resulting in a second hit that will almost certainly kill you if the first one didn't. But honestly, the fuck you laser isn't the biggest reason this set of bosses gets the bottom slot. The biggest reason for that is the unbelievably terrible AI. I know this game is rather infamous for its awful AI during boss fights, but I think these boss fights have it the worst. I literally beat the Prison Island version of this fight with Tails without moving an inch. All I did was sit in one spot and mash the shoot button. Don't believe me? Watch. Yeah, it's actually that pathetic. As far as the fun factor is concerned, these character fights are about on par with the other ones. But when I can literally win the fight without having to move, I'm not going to say the boss is well designed just because it's fun. Combine that with the aforementioned fuck you laser, and these character fights have enough going against them to take the bottom slot. Although listening to Eggman cuss out Tails never really gets old.
No match for me.
Number 8. The Knuckles vs. Rouge fights. Okay, now we're on to the fights that require you to actually do something to win. Granted, they're still not much better. Knuckles and Rouge only fight each other once in this story, so you only have to contend with this situation once. I will compliment this fight for the added dimension it has thanks to the flight. You don't always have to attack head on, you can also fly above your enemy and nosedive into them. This also just makes landing hits easier in general since the AI is far less likely to counter you when you attack in this way. However, everything I just said assumes you can locate your enemy in the first place. About 20 seconds into the fight, the floor underneath the arena opens, sending you floating up into the air. And you can't simply glide from that point. You have to slowly float your way over to the edges of the arena to get your footing back. It's easy to lose track of where the enemy character is when this happens, and it can make the fight a touch frustrating, especially if they nosedive into you from above without you seeing it coming. Also, when the enemy character is low on health, they use a special attack that can hit you from just about anywhere. That might sound bad if you've never played the game before, but these attacks aren't bad because they're impossible to avoid. In fact, as long as you're moving faster than a snail slowly inching toward its next meal, you will never get hit. The annoying part about them is how often the enemy uses the attacks. Once the special attack finishes, you have about 5 seconds until the AI uses it again, and this happens repeatedly until you finish the fight, which makes that whole can't locate the enemy problem even worse. The biggest reason these fights get the nod over the Tails vs Eggman fights is you actually have to move to win. Yeah, I'm not even shitting you, that's the major reason. Okay, there are a few other things. I do think the Knuckles vs Rouge fights have a slightly more impressive scale because of where they happen. And I do respect the decision to implement the floating gimmick, even though it definitely could have been done better. Plus, it's pretty nice to see Knuckles exercising his IQ to its fullest extent.
I have no choice but to fight now.
Number 7. The Robot Boss Fight. By that, I mean Bigfoot, Hotshot, and Flying Dog, which are fought by Sonic, Shadow, and Rouge respectively. This is essentially the same boss 3 times, but there are a few minor differences. All of the robot bosses will fly around and shoot machine guns at you while occasionally stopping in place to launch missiles. That's the best opportunity to hit them since, well, they're not moving. If you're quick enough, the missiles won't be able to touch you, but if you do get hit, you can usually take advantage of invincibility frames in order to retaliate. Hotshot and Flying Dog will also charge up a laser to shoot at you, but this can be easily avoided. None of these fights are particularly difficult, but I chose to place them higher on the list than a few others because they are at least an attempt to create some unique boss fights outside of just having you fight another character in the story. Also, I don't think the terrible AI is nearly as obvious here as it is in some of the fights I've already covered. However, it's still basically the same boss 3 times, so it's not the most creative thing in the world. These bosses are fun to mess around with for sure, but there's not a whole lot of praise to give out either. Number 6. Egg Golem Sonic version. I chose to count the 2 Egg Golem fights as separate bosses because fundamentally they are pretty different. Before we really get into this one though, can we talk about the pathetically stupid subtitle this boss got? Seriously, could the writers really not come up with something better than just the Golem? Anyway, this boss only has one attack worth talking about. It slams the ground in front of you with its fist in an attempt to damage you. Occasionally, it will also slam its head down. This boss is on the more boring side since it's nearly impossible to get hit, and even if you do get hit, it doesn't really matter since there's never a serious threat to you losing a life. To damage the boss, you need to circle around it and use homing attacks to travel up the back and eventually damage the head. The problem is, Sonic moves so fast that none of the boss's attacks will ever come remotely close to hitting you. Just circle around the back 5 times, mash jump, and you're done. It almost feels brainless. However, I will compliment the boss's design since it's definitely one of the cooler ones in the game. Having a massive golem come to life to attack you was a pretty cool idea, and the boss's attacks do look really nice despite not being very effective. If this boss had some faster attacks or maybe some attacks that were more difficult to anticipate, it would probably be ranked higher, but as it stands, it's 6th. Number 5. The Sonic vs Shadow fights. These are really similar to the other character fights in that your goal is just to beat down the enemy hedgehog before he beats you down. However, I think these character fights have a lot more going for them. I think the increased speed makes them a lot more enjoyable, and the enemy hedgehog actually fights back half the time. You can just spam homing attacks to get a few hits early, but to finish them off it's a lot faster if you get a little more creative. Death is actually a possibility since if you miss your homing attack, it's pretty easy to go flying off the edge of the stage, especially during the first encounter in Green Forest, so you have to actually think a little bit before you go in. In the space version of this fight, the enemy hedgehog will use a special attack if you get really far behind, similar to the special attacks used in the Knuckles Rouge fight. In the Sonic Shadow fights though, the enemy hedgehog only uses this attack if you fall behind as opposed to just spamming it every 5 seconds, so it's not nearly as annoying. These fights have a great atmosphere going for them as well, especially the space version, since the stakes of running toward the Eclipse Cannon with the fate of the entire world on the line makes the fight feel a lot more intense. These are definitely the best character fights in the game, and they're the only ones I really look forward to when I play the game. It's not that the other character fights are terrible, this game doesn't really have any bosses I consider outright terrible. They just aren't as memorable and they have more annoying quirks than the Sonic Shadow fights do. I think these fights are very appropriately placed in the middle of the list though, since they aren't quite as complex as some of the ones we've yet to cover. Number 4, the Bio Lizard. I'm not sure if this will be viewed as a controversial placement or not, but the Bio Lizard has given me all sorts of grief in the past. This boss is rough in quite a few areas, so let's just get right down to it. For starters, the camera. It's really annoying. The camera faces either the Bio Lizard's head or tail, depending on which one you're closer to. The problem with this is you can often get caught in that gray area where the camera isn't quite sure which direction it should be facing, so it just flip-flops back and forth rapidly. It can be pretty disorienting, especially if it happens while you're jumping over the weird liquid stuff, which is kinda dangerous since you can get swept away in the current and die if you get caught in it for too long. The Bio Lizard also launches dark orbs at you that you have to either jump over or somersault under, depending on the height of that specific orb. This part's not too bad since you can position yourself far away from the head to give yourself more time to react, although the somersault's ending lag might cause you to take a cheap hit or two. The most frustrating part about this fight though has to be the smaller red orbs. Once the Bio Lizard is down to half health, it will summon red orbs you have to homing attack chain off of to hit its weak point. These orbs are quite finicky since Shadow seems to pick and choose when he wants to homing attack an orb even if it's directly in front of him. Not only that, but some orbs will actively attack Shadow, and if an orb tries to attack you at the same time you attack it, then guess what? You're fucked. Of all the bosses in the game, this is definitely the one that produces the most what you might call bullshit deaths. Those being deaths that aren't really the player's fault, but are more the boss's mechanics just not working the best. So you might ask then, why did it make the 4th spot on the list? Well, despite all its faults, I think this boss does a great job at immersing the player. The actual design of the boss, that being an ugly crippled lizard, is quite intimidating and it fits the tone of the situation pretty well. This boss is more anxiety-inducing than it is fun, but I think that works in its favor. You are an extremely tiny hedgehog being tasked with taking down an aggressive creature at least 200 times your size, but you're gonna do it because you're the ultimate life form. I always feel a great sense of satisfaction when I defeat this boss, and it's still pretty good despite its flaws. But as I said a minute ago, it does have quite a few of those, so it's certainly not the best boss. Number 3, Egg Golem Eggman version. This version of the fight is significantly better than Sonic's version because Eggman's movement and attacking options are much better suited for a boss like the Egg Golem. The core challenge consists of shooting the Egg Golem's body to expose its batteries, then destroying the batteries themselves. Because you're in the mech, you can't just rely on speed to dodge every single one of the boss's attacks with ease. You have to actually anticipate its movements. You also have to attack the boss in the front, meaning you can't just sit behind it where you would be safe from all of its attacks. There's also a significant risk of death since you can only take so many hits and the rings beneath the arena only help so much. Even then, most of the high value ring bundles are placed above quicksand, so one bad jump can mean starting the fight all over again. This is probably the only boss in the game, excluding the Bio Lizard, that doesn't make you feel completely overpowered. One mistake can definitely kill you here, at least in my experience. It's one of the harder bosses for sure, but it's still fair, and as I said before, it does a great job of accommodating what the player is actually capable of in order to not be too difficult. This is truly a good boss. Number 2, the Final Hazard. Obviously, this boss has the most interesting scale of any boss in the game, and it's not really even close. It's truly a spectacle. I mean, you get to fly around above the earth with lasers being fired at you in your quest to take down the Final Hazard for real before it destroys the earth. It's truly a wonderful experience. The boss does have a time limit of 5 minutes, but that's not really a huge issue as long as you're not getting bodied the entire time. It's not a time limit that will infuriate new players unlike, say, Security Hall. You also have to watch your ring counter since you will die if you run out of rings, but you always have the option to switch to the other hedgehog if you're in danger of running out. My only serious gripe with this boss is how the lasers work. The Biolizard uses large lasers to protect itself from Sonic and Shadow, and the more hits you land, the more aggressively the lasers target you. If a laser hits you, you get knocked far away from the final hazard and you have to make your way back toward it. The problem is how long this process takes. You get stun locked for a really long time after getting hit, and it takes a long time to build up your forward momentum again. If the lasers hit you repeatedly, it gets even worse. It's not awful by any stretch, but it can be rather irritating. That said, this boss is a fantastic way to close out the game, and it's one of my favorite final bosses for a 3D Sonic game behind only Dark Gaia from Sonic Unleashed. However, there is still one boss in the game I think is better. Number 1. King Boom Boo. This might be a shocker to some of you, but I'm giving King Boom Boo the top slot. I love bosses that reward players for being skilled as opposed to forcing them to sit through long scripted animations or situations where the boss is just invincible for no reason whatsoever other than to pad out the length. King Boom Boo gets this exactly right. The boss will start by chucking fireballs at you that are pretty easy to outrun, although it does breathe fire as well. When at half health or lower, the boss will sometimes charge at you with insane speed, and it's pretty easy to get hit if you don't react quickly. You do have to run toward the camera a lot during this fight, but because there are no holes in the floor such as those in the Biolizard fight, that's not really an issue. You can make Knuckles' speed work for you instead of against you. This boss doesn't really have any bullshit attacks either. If you make mistakes, you get hit, but it never feels unfair. To damage King Boom Boo, you have to circle around behind it while it's executing certain attacks and hit an hourglass to open holes in the roof to expose the boss to light. Then you just dig the boss out of the ground and smack it around a few times until it goes down. This is where that whole rewarding the player for being skilled thing comes in. Landing one hit on King Boom Boo is rather easy, but after you land the first blow, he'll start moving way faster and you have to be really precise with your movements if you want to get a second hit before the lights go out again. It's kinda hard, but it's very doable. If you maximize your opportunities, you can take down the boss way faster. If not, you can still win without a ton of difficulty as long as you can anticipate the boss's attacks with some amount of accuracy. This boss is the perfect combination of challenging and fun, and I consider it the best boss in the game. And with that, we have ranked every single Sonic Adventure 2 boss from worst to best. I feel like this list is guaranteed to produce a ton of disagreement, so feel free to let me know all about them in the comment section. Whether you agreed or not, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you're watching this on the day it's uploaded, that means Christmas just passed, so if you celebrate it, I hope you had a good one. If you don't celebrate it, I hope you had a good day regardless. As I said at the start, I already made a video ranking all the Sonic Adventure 2 stages from worst to best, so consider checking that video out if you enjoyed this one. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.